Tiger fans, welcome to another episode of Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. I am the Corey C. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of all future episodes. Apple Podcasts and Spotify video users, rate and review the show. And everyone, go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. It all helps the cause, which is the I love Jackson State University. And we are back on the road this weekend, obviously heading to Texas to take on Texas Southern. And we are joined by a familiar face and a familiar voice. He is an award-winning sportscaster with close to 40 years of experience in the business, covering major sporting events. And luckily for us, he will be doing play-by-play for the Jackson State versus Texas Southern game this coming up weekend. None other than the great Butch Alsandor. Welcome back to Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club.
Thank you, Corey. Man, that intro, you make me sound pretty old there, but I started when I was 10, so that kind of
there you go. I was wondering that, how did that 40 add up? Because it obviously didn't look like it. So starting at 10, that makes a lot more sense now. Awesome. All right. Well, busy man. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time out to be with us, because I know you're pulled in a lot of different directions, doing a lot of different things. So update us since the last time we spoke 1 year ago. What are you up to? What has the season been looking like? What games have you covered? Give us the quick update.
Well, it's been a great season so far. I mean, there's so much attention going to the SWAC now that it's just great, and to me, the big change started when Deion Sanders took the Jackson State, and now he's Coach Prime, and he's taken on a whole new level. But it's so amazing, Corey, when you look at not only have they been successful on the field, because, I mean, you look at the amount of wins, and 8-0 right now for Jackson State, but what it has done for the rest of the league. I mean, you look around the league now, we've done just about everybody at this point in the year. You got Eddie Robinson Jr. over at Alabama State. You got Bubba McDowell at Prairie View. You got Hugh Jackson at Grambling. I mean, those doors, I really think like those doors became open because of what Jackson State did, and your athletic director reaching out to Deion Sanders and bringing him into the fold at Jackson State. And he's done so much, the wins and losses are one thing, but what he's done off the court too has been another thing. So it's just been an amazing run. And, I told someone this morning, it's just great for me to have an opportunity to call these games and see so much going on in the SWAC, so much positivity now. A couple of weeks ago, we actually did Jackson State and Campbell. And just talking to Coach Prime that week was incredible, because he talked about how he reached out to the community. He talked to the preachers, he talked to the community leaders. He said, I talked to drug dealers, man. He said, we wanted to have a crime-free weekend. We wanted it to be a very positive experience. And, that's what it's been. I mean, that's just been, like I said, wonderful for me to have an opportunity to call these games and just be involved with it.
Yeah, that's one thing that Coach Prime has actually done since day one, since September 21st, 2020, when he was announced at Jackson State. When he was announced in his introductory press conference, he didn't start out talking about football. He talked about the crime in the community and all these other things, and making sure he got out in the community. He wanted to eliminate the crime and do it, bring a lot of positivity to Jackson. And true to his word, that is exactly what he has been doing. Now, as far as you, with that buzz that there is with the SWAC, with you being connected with ESPN, what are the whispers that you're hearing from some of your counterparts as far as where the direction of the SWAC and the conference with what Coach Prime and obviously some other schools are doing?
Yeah, man, it's just blowing up, Corey. There's no other way to put it. I mean, you look at, game day going down to Jackson. I mean, that was huge. And it's just going to get better and better. And you're going to see it move you're going to see the SWAC games starting to migrate from the ESPN3 and the ESPN Plus, and you're going to see more of them on ESPNU and ESPN2 and the regular ESPN, because it's just, but the beauty of having so many platforms, you get to see everybody. I grew up in Louisiana, and last week we did Alcorn State at Grambling. My phone was blowing up during the game because so many people I grew up with, they were watching Grambling and enjoying the game and just, saying how much so that's what it's doing. It's giving everybody an outlet to see your team and to see your team have success. And that ended up being, a lot of people thought Grambling was going to get beat in that game, and they ended up pulling, I would say if it was an upset, it was a stunning upset, because they played really well, and Alcorn never really got going in that game.
And with the games, with all the exposure and a lot of the games, or most of the games, I think all of Jackson State's games, except maybe one so far, has been on the ESPN family of networks. And you don't have to get into the specific numbers, but just from what you're seeing on the inside perspective, what is viewership like? Is it overall, is it warranting us to get more games on ESPN?
Yeah, it is. And the viewership is up from last year. I will tell you that. But it's even up more so when Jackson State is on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the needle moves a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more when J State is on. And that's great because you're having the big crowds at home. So you have the stadium full, and then you got the eyes on you on TV. And that's the ultimate goal, just to get as much exposure as you can, for not only for the school, but for some of these young athletes who have an opportunity maybe to play at the next level. But even if you don't, just to be a part of that atmosphere and just kind of just watching the way it's just kind of taken off. And the main reason why it's happened is because Coach Prime went there, and he went there on a mission. You know what I'm saying? He didn't go there just to coach. You know, he went there to change lives. And it sounds like a cliche, but man, that's what he's doing. And that's what's happening, you know, and people are looking at certain things in a different way. And it's because he's immersing himself in this. You know, I saw a video the other day. He went to a hospital and was seeing a children's hospital and talking to different people like that. And those are the things that make an impact. You know, when he wanted to put in a new field, you know, he goes to Walmart, you know, I mean, because Deion Sanders, he's got that cachet where he can get places that, you know, maybe us normal folks can't get.
Absolutely. I always say there's only one Deion Sanders. Well, there's two. There's Deion Sanders Jr., but there's only one prime time.
But he's had so much success, and what I'm hoping is that his success bleeds over. Like I said, it's one thing to have these other guys with the NFL pedigrees coming in, but I'm hoping they're going to see what Coach Prime is doing off the field also, and start implementing that agenda also, you know, at their respective schools.
Definitely. Great point. That's good stuff. But let's get into this game. Obviously, you know, big game for our Tigers on the road heading into Texas Southern. So me personally, I'm having a hard time kind of getting a good read on this team when you kind of look at their season, how it's gone, some big wins and then some kind of, you know, losses that you'll kind of question. But overall, 4-4, 3-2 in the SWAC, still have an opportunity to represent the West. So this is a big game for Texas Southern. So just a quick synopsis of the season so far for the Tigers.
Well, you know, technically, they're in second place because they beat Southern. So right now they're in the standings. They're tied with Southern, but they have the tiebreaker with Southern right now. So no, this is not the old Texas Southern team. You don't want to fool yourself into that thinking. And you're right. There've been some ups and some downs. You know, I actually called the game when Texas Southern took on Alabama State at PNC here in Houston, and that was a game they should have won. They could easily have won that game. Alabama State played a really good game. I mean, they kicked the field goals. They didn't make any mistakes. They just played a perfect game, whereas Texas Southern made one big fumble late in the game. And that was the difference in that game. But, you know, they've had some stunning wins. That win over Southern in Dallas was a huge win. They go to Alcorn, and they win there. And I would have to say, Corey, the biggest difference with this team is the defense.
Okay.
Last year, late in the season, after they made the switch and moved Andrew Body to quarterback, they were putting points on the board. They were scoring and they were putting points on the board. The problem they were having back then, they just couldn't stop anybody. And so Coach McKinney went out during the offseason and he looked at the spots he needed to fill on defense. And that portal is a wonderful thing for coaches to get well quickly. And he got some new guys in there, particularly in the secondary. And, you know, they're doing a lot better defensively, and that's why you see this team. And also, the running game is a lot better than a lot of people realize. You know, I mean, they've been doing a great job. They got a 1-2 punch with Ja'Cory Howard and Ladarius Owens. And those two guys, man, they're both, I like to say they're full-grown men. I mean, when they're back there, they can really, really bring the punishment to a defense. And that's a big advantage to have if you manage to get in front. And I think that's what they've been able to do once they get ahead, like against Alcorn 2 weeks ago. They got out in front, then they could run the ball and make something happen. But they're explosive. I mean, they can make – this is not the Texas Southern team that you're used to looking at.
So talk about those two. I call them surprising wins over Southern. I think at the beginning of the season, most people would have predicted Southern to be in the running, Alcorn and Prairie View, but Texas Southern just got out of nowhere, just coming and upsetting. I call it an upset Southern, and then Alcorn as well. So is that a game, or are those games? Just talk about how big those wins were for the confidence of this program moving forward, and is that a game that guys like yourself expected them to win, or at least could be competitive in?
No, at that point, I didn't know what to expect. I actually
Mhm.
had to open the season way back in September 3rd, that Labor Day weekend. I did the Labor Day Classic with
Mhm.
Texas Southern versus Prairie View A&M. And Texas Southern did not, a lot of people had a lot of expectations going into that game, and they didn't look as good as we expected. And I think the bar was lowered at that point. But I think that was one of the turning points in the season, when after they saw that, they go, that's not who we are. That's not who we want to be. I mean, they have a logo. I wrote it down. We are what we got, and we are all we need. I mean, that's
Mhm.
kind of like their slogan for the season. And the next turning point would have to have been that Southern game in Dallas, because nobody gave them much of a chance to win that game. And they go in there and they force some turnovers, and
Mhm.
they played really well defensively. And they had Southern off balance pretty much the whole game. I mean, that
Mhm.
was just a big game. And ever since then, I think that was the one game you could point to and say, after that game, they believed in themselves and they
Mhm.
had confidence in themselves moving forward. And I really think the Alabama State game was just kind of a stumble. Like I said, they
Gotcha.
had the ball late in the game. They had the lead. They fumbled. They had a young man in the game who's just an electric kick returner, but he's not a running back. And he was in the
Mhm.
backfield at the time. It was mishandling the exchange, or they was trying to do a handoff. Ball was fumbled. Alabama State recovered, and they go down and win the game.
Mhm. Definitely,
But you got to
definitely.
give them a lot too, because, like I said, they stayed in it. They stayed in it. They might have, if I'm not mistaken, I think they kicked 4 field goals in that game. They were just making sure they stayed in striking distance, and down the stretch, it was a mistake that was the difference.
Mhm. Now, you talked about that defense, the much improved defense, only allowing 20 points per game. I definitely want to get to that, but I think when we talk Texas Southern football, I think it's going to always start with Mr. Andrew Body, a guy who a lot of people picked, potential conference player of the year, or have a player of the year type season. So far on the season, if you look at the numbers, kind of up and down, 1,300 yards. Obviously, we're talking 8 games, but 58% completion percentage, 8 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Let's talk about his season so far, because some may say he hasn't lived up to those expectations.
Well, the numbers aren't eye popping by any stretch of the imagination. They're not eye popping, because people thought at the beginning of the year he'd be throwing for 300 yards every
Mhm.
game, rushing for 100 yards. But here's the thing that he's doing. I mean, like I said, we've done them several times, and we will have them this week against Jackson State. Then we'll have them the following week
Okay.
against. The thing he has been doing is he's been doing what they need him to do to win. If you
Okay.
look at that Alcorn game, it was Alcorn's homecoming. They go down there for homecoming. A couple of times when they had 3rd and 7, he would scramble out of the pocket and pick up 9.
Mhm.
I mean, so he's making the plays that they need him to make right now. And what they're finding out is they don't need him to throw for 300 yards to win ball
Okay.
games. And that's the ultimate goal, is to win ball games. And that's what they were doing. They want to have a winning season. They haven't had a winning season in a while.
Mhm.
And that's a big deal. And now, like you mentioned, they're right in the thick of it. Of course, chasing in the West, they have the loss to Prairie View, so they have to be really, they're going to have something happen down the stretch. But
Mhm.
they're in good position, and they're fired up about this weekend.
Mhm. So you mentioned him, making those big runs on third, especially on third down, converting on the ground against Alcorn. So as I look at this team, I see 3 players averaging over or close to double-digit carries per game. So if you hear that, you think they have a three-headed monster at running back, but one of them is actually Andrew Body, and he leads
Yeah.
the team in rushing attempts. So is that just, but I know obviously he's always been a, athlete, dual threat, but is that by design? Is he more just improvising, or as you said earlier, just doing whatever it takes to win?
No, it's both, because as the season started, it was kind of him just scrambling out of the pocket trying to make something happen. But as the season has gone along, they've put in more design runs. You see
Okay.
him, running a quarterback sweep left or a quarterback sweep right, or they've put some of these things in there, or even the draw. They'll call a pass, they'll spread out the field, get the one-on-one coverage on both sides, and let him just take off, trying to pick his holes. So yeah, they're doing both of it now, and that's been they've had a good mixture of what they needed to do to win ball games. If they need
Mhm.
him, like I said, to throw for the 300 yards,
Mhm.
he's do that. If they need him
Mhm.
to run, he's been able to do that. And he's been some of the losses they've had. He's had key mistakes. You know, he's thrown like interceptions in the end zone a couple of times to people that have really hurt. But I think he's learned from those situations. And what you see right now, and you don't see the big staggering numbers, but it's because he's not making the big mistakes anymore either. I think that's a big part of it.
All right. So you said that they don't have to rely on him to throw the ball around a lot to win games, and that's evident when you look at the numbers of his receivers. Not a lot from the receiving core. I think their leading receiver, Derek Morton, he's only averaging about 3 catches per game. That's not a lot. Now, if you go down the line, they have a number of guys who have caught at least a pass this season. So there are a lot of guys who have caught a ball, but again, not that guy who stands out at you, who jumps out as far as being a 1,000-yard receiver potentially. So just talk about that receiver core. Is there a guy that Texas Southern can rely on as a receiver if they need to get it done through the air?
They get you're right. Derek Morton has kind of become the favorite receiver. He and Body have kind of worked out a little chemistry there, but also AJ Bennett, number 4. I mean, AJ Bennett is a little guy, but he's been making some big plays for them. You're right, Corey, when you say they kind of share the wealth. The ball goes around to everybody, and it's because of the way the offense is designed. And Body, 9 times out of 10, the ball's going to go to the open man instead of trying to force feed one guy who's capable of making all these big plays. But I think while the offense is passing part of the offense may even be more effective now because the running game is so good, they can pick their spots for the passing. You know, they'll run, they'll pound that rock on you, pound it, and then all of a sudden he'll pull it up and go downfield deep. But Derek Morton has been the guy. I would have to say he's been the most reliable guy. AJ Bennett has also been in the mix. I mean, they have some guys. Ian Means has been out there a lot. They have some guys, but it's funny to watch because it's kind of a mixture of things right now. You know, they'll run the ball with success. They'll throw the ball underneath. And the other thing is the running backs on this team, they catch a lot of passes too.
Okay.
Yeah, the running backs do catch a lot of passes. So that's another big part of the offense. But I like to look at this matchup, and of course, it's like comparing apples and oranges. It doesn't really mean anything. But you look at common opponents. Like when I'm getting prepared to do this game, you know, I looked at the Jackson State game last week against Southern. I think I watched the first 3 quarters of it. And if you look at that game, that was a pretty good game until the final 2:30 of the first half. I mean, there was no score after 1 quarter, and Southern's defense was really playing well. They stopped Jackson State twice on 4th and 1. So, and look at that, and you compare what happened to TSU when they were playing Southern. And then the Southern game for TSU was pretty much their coming out party, and as far as the defense forcing these turnovers and stuff. So I think, if we'd be doing this last year at this time, Texas Southern probably would have been a little in awe and kind of more. And this year, I kind of think like they feel like they have a shot to play with these guys. You know, it would be a upset that shocks the world, but I don't think they're intimidated as they might have been in the past going into the game. I think they can look at common opponents like Grambling and think like, or even Alabama State. You know, they beat Alabama State, but Alabama State was in that game, and I'm sure Texas Southern feel like they should have won that game. So, I can promise you. Coach Prime is telling his guys, you know, you can't sleep on this team. This is not old Texas Southern, the team of old.
Definitely. Well, I know the Jackson State team will be up for the task. It'll be an interesting matchup. Jackson State, you know, from a defensive standpoint, they've held every opponent this season under 250 total yards, and 5 out of the 8 games, opponents have been limited to just 1 score. Overall, they're actually the 3rd best scoring defense in the entire country. That's behind Illinois and Georgia. So it'll be interesting to see what Mr. Body, Coach McKinney, has up their sleeve to combat that defense. But I want to move over to the Texas Southern defense. You talked about it being improved. I see 2 guys who stand out. Your leading tacklers, or their leading tacklers rather. Jacob Williams, 54 tackles, and Tariq Cooper, 44 tackles coming from the linebacker position. So talk about those 2 guys and just the defense in general.
Those are the 2 leaders on defense by far. They're the 2 leaders. Jacob Williams, his mother is actually a professor at Texas Southern. And so he's one of these guys who's really like, you know, the honor student guy. You know, he's does really well in school, does everything well. And he has really come into his own this year. Coming into the season, there was a lot of hype about Tariq Cooper, and Coops lived up to the hype. I mean, he's been good, but Williams has kind of come out of nowhere, and he's really making his presence felt. He's one of those guys. He goes sideline to sideline. I mean, he's a throwback. I mean, he gets the job done, and those guys are playing well. And a lot of times they're making plays because the big fellas up front are doing their job, keeping the big guards and tackles off of those linebackers. So that's probably been the biggest improvement on defense is the play of Jacob Williams. I mean, he's been outstanding because Cooper needed somebody like that, to be, Robin to his Batman and kind of bring that same intensity and passion on defense. And that, that's what he's doing right now. But you look at a guy like Viramontes Pippins on the line. I mean, he's been good this year too. I mean, he kind of stepped into his own. Some of the guys, he was there last year, but there's some new guys in the secondary too. And Pippins and DeMontario Anderson, some of those guys up front. I mean, they're doing a great job of the one thing they haven't done well, from what I've seen on tape, and obviously I haven't done all of their games, but I've done a few of them. They haven't put pressure on the quarterback without.
Absolutely.
That's been kind of one of the things they're trying to work out, because if you can't pressure the quarterback without having, then you're going to have some issues there, and that's been the one thing they haven't really been able to work out yet.
Yeah, that stands out when you look at this team, the lack of pressure on the quarterback. The leading sack person is Michael Akins with only 2 sacks. So it tells me that they're not, getting to the quarterback, which typically puts a strain on the secondary. So how do you feel as though the secondary has fared this year, given the lack of pressure on the quarterback?
Well, they have a young man, Isaiah Hamilton, and he's been outstanding. I mean, he's got, if I'm not mistaken, 3 interceptions. He's run one back for a touchdown, or maybe 2. I think at least one back, because he did one in one of the games we did. He has been a game changer this year. I mean, he's been very well. Like I said, they had trouble in the secondary last year. For the last few years, the secondary has been kind of an issue. And he's been one of the guys really stepping up and making some big plays for them in the secondary. Raheem Fuller is also doing a good job. And, one of the ways they're getting pressure, which you don't necessarily like to do, but a lot of times they're blitzing some of these guys from the secondary too after a while, just to try. You just have to pick your spot with that. That's a dangerous thing to do against a guy like Sanders, because he can look out there. If he spots the guy that's coming, he's going to go right in that area that you vacated, and it's going to be a play for Jackson State.
Yeah, definitely a very cerebral quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. He's always studying film, even on the bus ride or the plane trip. He's looking at film, going over some final details to make sure he knows exactly what he can expect from opposing defense. So obviously, we look forward to a chess match coming up this Saturday. So should be fun. Should be a lot of fun.
Well, and the other thing is too, anytime Jackson State goes anywhere in the SWAC now, it's a big deal. It's a show.
Absolutely.
Coach Prime is coming to town, and even, for their home games, you're having the big crowd at home, but you never know who's going to be on the sideline.
Never know.
It was T.O., then it was Snoop Dogg at the game we did, the Campbell game. I think it was Snoop Dogg on the sideline.
Rick Ross.
Yeah. So it's made everything so much more exciting, and it's kind of a must-see, must-attend event now. It gets kind of like, I had a buddy of mine who used to live in Jackson. He said, man, it's the biggest thing in Jackson now.
It is.
Everybody trying to get to the games, and it's just a cool. And I look at that defense because, you're preparing for these games. You have to kind of look at, I don't know if I've ever seen a defense like that in college football. Wow. I mean, they get after you.
That's saying something.
They get after you. They put the heat. They got really good linebackers. I love Aubrey Miller. I mean, that guy is a huge player. I mean, he makes some big plays. I know Shiloh has been hurt a little bit in the secondary, but he came back.
He's back.
I guess his second game back was the game we did. And man, it was late in the game. He was still like smacking people down. I mean, it was like, it's a fun game to call, to watch them and watch what's going on. I mean, it's just like I said, it's an amazing time in the SWAC, and to see the league get some of the attention that it deserves, and some of these players kind of, get the national spotlight that they deserve.
Yeah. So, you mentioned Aubrey, you mentioned Shiloh. The list goes on when it comes to this defense. I hate coming on the show and start naming names because you'll forget someone, but one person.
You can just go down the list.
You can go down the list. But one person I want to bring up, especially when you talk about the attention that the SWAC is getting, is Mr. Travis Hunter. I mean, he lives up to the hype. Talk about taking away half the field. You know, that's a term, a phrase that you hear, but you don't really ever see that. But he actually does it, and he's doing it as a true freshman. So, I mean, he's everything that, you know, that was said of him and more.
Well, we saw it last week. We saw it last week because he went out there and literally he did whatever side of the field he was. That receiver was on lockdown, and because, you know, Southern was the team, we've done them a couple of times too, obviously, and they like to take the big shot. You know, they'll pound down and then they'll take the big shot to one of those big receivers they have, and never really happened. That number 88, Pete, I forget his first name, Southern Pete. He was a really explosive guy. He's a guy, he's got good size. He can get down. You know, never happened. Wasn't even a factor in the game. Just total shutdown. So that's a beautiful thing. And Coach Prime told us he's going to start working Travis in more and more to the offense, trying to come up with plays and packages for him with the offense where he can use that explosive speed. And so it just, one of the things I thought, I just want to mention this because I thought that was so. Last year, Jackson State wins the SWAC championship. And you think, oh, wow, you know, that's great. You got to, you know, obviously you won a championship, you got a good team. When we were talking to Coach Prime a couple of weeks ago, he said, I said, what would you think was the number one factor in Shador continuing to improve? I said, last year as a freshman, he surpassed all expectations, did great, but he's better this year. I'm like, what's the biggest factor in him improving like that? He goes, I'll tell you what it is. It's the offensive line.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
We have improved the offensive line, and then he goes in to explain how, yes, we got only one starter back from last year. And you don't see that, Corey. You don't see a team going out, and after they win the championship, you come back and you tweak. You're still trying to get better. You want to get even better, and that's what they're doing. And it's kind of like he told us when during the week when we were talking to him before the game. He said, we don't want to just win. We want to dominate. Dominate.
That's been the theme all season.
Yeah. And dominate. So they're a special team. I mean, it's a fun team. I thought I saw one poll this morning. They were up to number 5 in FCS. And it's just, you know, they deserve the ranking. They got Wilkerson coming in. You know, he's the guy coming in. He's making a big impact in the backfield. And the wide receivers, they play 7 or 8 wide receivers. I was asking about what happened to
Malachi Wideman.
Nothing. He just, you know, hard to get on the field now.
It's crazy.
7 or 8 guys.
Yeah, it's hard. It's competition in practice, and you know, there's so many guys, and when one's not available or doesn't play, they don't miss a beat. It's almost like plug and play. They're all almost equally as good. So definitely a fun thing to watch. And you mentioned Wilkerson because you talked about Coach Prime saying the biggest addition improvement was the offensive line. Well, I'll say the offensive line as well as the running game by adding a Savion Wilkerson. He's a difference maker. So it's just hard to game plan against this team.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a guy. He's a big running back. You know, he's physical. He has speed, and a guy like that takes a toll on the defense. You know, games everybody's running up there to hit him, but by the time you get to the late third quarter, early fourth quarter, you know, the defense aren't showing up anymore. They're not. You know, they're not going to show up for that punishment. So he's been a big help.
So having said all that, we've talked about how good this team is, how dominant they've been. If you're Texas Southern, what are the keys to victory? What do you say you have to do in order to give yourself a chance?
I think, you know, after looking at both teams, and you know, it's hard for me to say because I'm going to be calling the game, but from what I've seen, I just think for them to have a really good shot at victory, they're going to have to somehow find a way to put the pressure on. They're going to have to move Shador. And he did a good job of it last week. You know, when he was pressured into the pocket, he didn't panic. There were a couple of times when Southern only rushed 3, and he was very aware of it and knew he didn't have to rush. But somehow they're going to have to make him uncomfortable. And to start the game, you're just going to have to take away the run. And it's the same thing for Jackson State. You know, they don't want to really let Texas Southern come out and start having any success at all on the ground, because that will make life a little easier for Andrew Body. If they can run the ball with some success, get 5 or 6 yards of crack, I mean, that would be it. But, you know, I think they realize, I'm talking about Texas Southern and what a challenge it's going to be. I just think that this year, when you look at how they've played, they're they may be more ready for the challenge than they've ever been. So we'll have to see how it works. Now, it's also going to be, I don't know if you realize this, because of the rain out in the World Series, if
Yes.
it goes to 6
Talk
games,
about it.
Game 6 will be going on at the same time with the Jackson State and Texas Southern game. And the way things are located here in Houston, you have Minute Maid Park. PNC Park is right down the street. I mean, they actually share some of the parking spaces. So that's going to be interesting.
Have they established a potential start time for their game?
For the World Series
baseball game? Yeah, if
it's going to be a 7:00 start. It's going to be, so there'll be an hour after we kick off.
Wow.
But it really doesn't matter because the World Series, everybody's going to be down there like 3-4 hours early.
All day. Yeah, got it.
And the thing for the Texas Southern Jackson State game. So it's just going to be a lot of hype in downtown Houston on Saturday night.
Absolutely.
Either way you look. Of course, it may not go to 6 games, and then that would be great also, because that means, everybody could have all the spaces you want. But I just think this is going to be a game that maybe one of the bigger crowds for Texas Southern, even with the World Series game going on.
Absolutely. Expecting a big crowd. Obviously, Jackson State travels, and it will have a huge alumni base throughout the state of Texas, but especially in Houston. So we'll be there. So you expect the Texas Southern fans to show up as well?
I do. And they retool some of the things. They have buses that go from campus. The stadium is actually only a few miles from campus, but it's the route you have to take that for the students. It's easier for them to just take the buses in there. So I expect this is to be one of their bigger crowds. Last week there was homecoming. There was a nice crowd, but it was on campus. They usually play their home games over in PNC Park. And, that's where they're going to be for this one. And they know that Jackson travels well. So that's the thing about it. They know for the next 2 weeks with Jackson State coming in and then with Grambling coming in, those two teams are going to bring their crowds. So they've been trying to make an effort to get more and more people, of their fans into the stadium there. Because, nobody wants to be in your own stadium and have more fans for the other team. You don't want to have that situation. So.
Sure thing. All right. Well, we are looking forward to it again. A 6 p.m. kickoff. ESPN plus the great Butch Alsandor on the call. Thank you again. This is a pleasure to have you on our show again.
Thank you, Corey. Anytime, man.
All right. Take care. Yeah. And that'll do it for this episode of Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. Thank you to all of our listeners. And again, be sure to download and subscribe to the podcast. Apple Podcasts and Spotify video users rate and review the show. And everyone, go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. We're looking to do some big things with this platform to aid the athletics department. And it all starts with you downloading, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. And tell every Tiger that you know. We're on all podcast outlets, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify video, YouTube, and so on. And we'll be posting each episode on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. As always, thanks for your support. Go Tigers. #IBELIEVE. #TheILove.